Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my honour and privilege to invite our first speaker, but let me first introduce her, Lucy Urquhart from ComLink Australia.
Thank you. It's lovely to see so many beautiful smiling faces out there this morning, particularly on a chilly morning as it was this morning. As Colin said, my name is Lucy and I'm here to talk you through a practical presentation for navigating the aged care system, what it means, what you're entitled to, and actually where to start, because it is quite confusing. It can be overwhelming. There is a lot of different programs. There's a lot of different funding options. So I think we'll just start with the basics. So we'll start with navigating the aged care system, and the first place for us to start. So we're going to start with what is the aged care system. So your first point of call is going to be My Aged Care, also known as MAC. It's the central entry point where everyone starts. We then will look at the registration process, how we register and what we need to have ready. We'll then move across to the assessment, which used to be called either a RAS assessment or an ACAT assessment. It is now called the single assessment system. We'll have a quick chat about what CHISP services are available. CHISP, which is actually the Commonwealth Home Support Program, and then we'll lightly touch on support at home, which is our home care package, well, our former home care package program. So, My Aged Care. As I said, My Aged Care is the government central entry point for all aged care services. So this is where you'd go whether you're looking for information or wanting to register or just finding out what your options are. This is where we'll start. MAC does not deliver the services itself, but it connects you with the assessment team and approved providers who do. So there's a couple of ways you can get information from My Aged Care or MAC. They have a really good website if you are tech savvy or you have someone in your family that is tech savvy and can support you through that. There's another option if you're not great on computers or you find that overwhelming is you can actually phone them and their phone number is right there, but we'll have that information as well for you later. MAC is where they'll hold your assessment. So they're going to hold all of your information there. So it's your assessment, the services that you've been approved for, and it's a very secure site. So I don't want you to feel nervous about engaging with MAC and having to tell them everything that's going on with you. It's also somewhere where you can get an interpreter. So whether it is a language barrier, whether it's a literacy barrier, My Aged Care has all of those sorts of services to support you. The registration process. Is anyone here already registered with My Aged Care? Oh, awesome. We've got lots of hands. So you've probably already been through this process, but for those of you in the room that haven't or are looking to register a loved one, there's a couple of things that you're going to need to have ready. You're going to need to have your Medicare card, your pension card if you have one, your regular GP details. Another really good option is if you've got an updated health summary, because they will be asking you about your medical conditions. They'll want a description of what kind of supports you have, whether you've got family, children, neighbours, community supports, and details of any of your health, existing health diagnoses or anything else that you're actually struggling with. So when you call, have all of that information ready because they're going to ask you lots of questions. Again, the people at My Aged Care are setting up a record. It's not their decision to whether or not you're independent enough to stay safe in your own home. It is an information gathering process. So the more honest you are with them, the better understanding they're going to have of your needs. Once you've registered and they ask you your initial questions, they're going to create a client record. This record has all of your information on it. It's a central point. So once you're in the system and you've got a provider, it's where we'll be able to find information as well. It'll also direct them in the right pathway as to what kind of assessment that you need. So they will then send an assessment referral. So My Aged Care doesn't actually do the assessments. For people looking for services, they will send a referral to a provider that provides those assessments. And then from there, you'll be issued a referral code. You'll also be given what we call an AC number, an aged care number, which is your identification number. So it's a really good idea to keep that handy and somewhere easy because every time you call them, they're going to ask you for that number. So the assessment. So some of you have already been assessed, probably in this room. We used to have the RAS assessors and the ACAT assessors, but since the major reform, we are now under a single assessment called the SAS, and they will actually either come out to your home, which is probably preferable, or if you're only looking for some lower level services, you might actually get a phone call from them and they will do the assessment over the phone. What the assessment tool actually looks like. So now we will use an integrated assessment tool, and it's a comprehensive standardised assessment covering all the factors that affect your ability to live safely and independently. So they're going to look at your health. What are your current conditions? Diagnoses, medications, have you had any recent falls or are you a falls risk? They're going to look at the safety of your home, your memory, your cognitive function, medication management. They're also going to have a look at your daily tasks. So what can you manage independently and where do you need some assistance, whether that's just some general household cleaning or some gardening, maybe some transport, all the way up to assistance with some personal care. They're going to talk to you about your supports. Who's your family that's around? Who supports you? Doesn't have to always be a son or a daughter or a spouse. It can be your friends. It can be your neighbours. They're going to want to know what your goals are. Now, this is a really tricky one because everyone's goal is to remain safe and independent in their own home for as long as possible. So when we talk about goals, we probably need to have a chat about what would prevent us from living safe and independently in our own home. Is that if I was a falls risk? Would that be a goal? I need to work on my falls prevention. I need to work on my strength and stability. It could be that not being able to manage my medication could be the difference between staying at home and not being able to stay at home. So have a really good think about what it is that you're struggling with and what are some of the goals that you would like to achieve that support you to remain in your own home, because they are they will give you referral codes for services that support those goals. And of course, they'll look at your cultural needs. Cultural, language and communication needs are always considered throughout all of these assessments. Once you've been assessed, quite often the entry or the starting point is CHISP. It's the Commonwealth Home Support Program. Is there a show of hands of anyone here on CHISP services? Excellent. So CHISP provides the basic government funded services to help older Australians continue to live at home. It is usually a small amount. Most of the time, it's only meant to be 1 or 2 referral codes to certain services or help with just particular tasks. We like to say it is the entry level into the aged care system. I know that a lot of people get referral codes and quite often it's frustrating because you'll ring up providers and they don't actually have access or enough availability for those CHISP codes. And that's because when you have your assessment, they're not aware of how much government funding is sitting out there with the providers. So they'll assess you and give you a lot of codes. But unfortunately, as a provider, we're only given a set block funding and a certain amount of outputs for those certain codes. So when you do ring a provider and say, I've been given cleaning, and they say, I'm really sorry, we don't have capacity, it's because we've already hit our capacity for providing those services. So that's also quite tricky because we know you need the services, but unfortunately out there in the industry, a lot of people seem to be at full capacity. So that's another place where you'd ring back my AgedCare and say, can you please let me know who is open for these set referral codes in my area? What kind of services can we get under CHSP? And bearing in mind, we should only be getting 1 or 2 of these services because it is an entry-level program. Services such as allied health and therapy. So this is where we would get an occupational therapist to come and visit our home, make sure that all of our equipment is safe, to see if there's anything that we need to keep us safe and independent in our home, right through to podiatrists, exercise physiologists that keep us strong, reduce our falls risks, right down to the podiatrist when it gets a little bit harder to cut your own toenails, speech therapists, dietitians. We can get all of those services under CHISP, but they're an entry level. So it's usually to address a certain point in your life. Domestic assistance, which is now called general household cleaning. As you know, this is probably one of our most popular CHISP services because as we get a little bit older, it gets a little bit harder to get down on our hands and knees and scrub the bathroom floors or mow our lawns. So domestic assistance, gardening, they tend to be your most common CHISP referral codes, right through to transport. When that dreaded time comes, if it comes that we can no longer drive ourselves where we need to go, you can get a transport code and you can engage services such as ComLink, or there's a lot of other organisations that can give you taxi vouchers under the CHISP referral codes, right through to nursing, personal care. Social support is really important as well. Quite often when we are no longer driving for ourselves, we're actually no longer accessing our communities that we always would in the past. So social support or social support group are also quite common. Once we've been on CHISP or we've gone in as an entry level of CHISP and our needs increase, which quite often they do, unfortunately, as we age, things quite often get a little bit more difficult, we can ask for a reassessment. It's not always that easy. As Darren and I were having a conversation, because the wait times for a reassessment are quite long. So it's a really good idea to stay in front of when things are changing, but I think Darren will talk about that next. But if your needs have increased and life's becoming a little bit trickier to remain independent in your own home, you'll go back to My AgedCare and you'll ask for an assessment. It'll be the same assessment process. They will already have your client record and they're going to be able to see where you were and now where you are and what you're struggling with. If you're assessed for higher need care, you'll be assessed for what we call now the Support at Home program. So before, as you're probably all aware, we've just been through a massive reform, probably the biggest reform that the aged care sector has ever seen. And we've gone from having what we used to call home care packages now to the Support at Home program. So as of the 1st of November 2025, the Support at Home program replaced our old home care package program and our short-term restorative care program. It's to bring us under one single flexible system. It is designed to keep us home and safe for longer, more equitable access to services. It's to reduce waiting times, which we're still waiting to see how that happens, but we're new. We're not even 12 months into the reform. And it's to give you greater choice and control, okay? So the new Support at Home has 8 classifications. So in the old home care package program, we had 1 to 4. Now in Support at Home, we have 1 to 8. And you can see there's a huge difference in funding. So someone on a level 1 gets around $10,700 a year towards services to keep them safe and independent in their home. And then, of course, it goes all the way up to level 8. For anyone that is experiencing higher need or levels of care, can get up to $78,100 a year. So it seems like quite a lot of money. And the reason why the government has decided to allocate these kind of funds is because it keeps the pressure off the hospital systems and it prevents early access into residential aged care facilities. Because let's be honest, we all want to stay at home for as long as possible. Probably some of the most confusing things about the new Support at Home system and how we're managing those funds is it's broken up into 3 different categories. So you've got your clinical supports, independent, and then your everyday living. And where the services fall into each of these categories can also affect what your personal contribution could be. So I'll go through that a little bit in finer details. So under Support at Home, you've got a quarterly budget that comes through out of that $10,000. It comes through on a quarterly basis, and we are allowed to spend it on clinical services, independent services, and everyday living services. So as you can see, everyday living is those things that we all do every day. The general household cleaning, some shopping, laundry, home maintenance and repairs, gardening, and of course meals. There are everyday living services. Then the middle category is our independence. So that would be personal care only at the moment, because personal care is going to move to clinical care as of the 1st of November. But it includes social supports, community engagement, your transport, therapeutic services like chiropractor, acupuncture and remedial massage, respite, transport, and assistive technology and home modifications. And I'll touch on those a little bit later because they're a little bit confusing, the AT and HM funding. And of course, we've then got our clinical services. So that would be your nursing, any allied health, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health practitioners and health workers, prescribed nutrition products and aids, and of course the care management, which is what comes out of your package funds to your provider. So everyone always wants to know, what is this going to cost me? Because yes, with the reform, no longer as a home care package free for the pensioner, we are now all asked to pay a contribution to our services. We only pay a contribution on the days that we get services, and it's broken down into everyday living is what we will pay the highest personal contribution for. So it ranges for a full pension about 17.5%. And because I'm not a mathematician, let's go with, if a service is $100, you're going to be paying $17.50 of that $100 service. That's what a personal contribution is. Now, if you're a part pensioner, it could range anywhere from 17.5 to 80% for those everyday living services. So you can imagine that's quite a lot to pay for a cleaning if you're a fully funded retiree. But the beauty is you're only paying these when you get a service. And of course, self-funded retirees, they'll pay that 80. It'll be capped at 80% of that service price. Independent services, full pensioners, we're only going to pay 5%. So if you get a clean at $100 an hour, you're only going to pay 5% of that. So that seems like pretty good value. Well, not a clean because that's under everyday living. Let's go with transport. I think transport's a really good indication because you couldn't get transport cheaper than paying $5 an hour for it, considering fuel and wear and tear on a car. Then if you're a part pensioner, it could be anywhere between 5 and 50%. And then, of course, the fully funded retiree will pay 50%. The really exciting part about the support at home in the 3 different categories is clinical supports. No one pays a personal contribution to clinical supports, which I think is amazing. It is the most expensive services that you'll receive under your support at home package. It is also the services that will keep you safe, strong, healthy, and independent in your own home. So that occupational therapist, the allied health, physios, podiatrists, nursing, you won't pay any personal contribution. So the reason this is set up and designed is when the government went through the reform and they looked at what's happening to our hospital beds. We don't have enough beds for people to go into residential aged care facilities, so they're sitting in the hospitals. And they realised that it's actually cost a lot more money to have us in the public system than it would be to provide these services to keep us safe and independent in our own home. I guess the biggest problem, the biggest challenge a lot of people faced was when they were actually in the system before the reform rolled out. And then we had a whole group of clients, whether they were grandfathered, which meant that they were in the system before the 12th of September 2024, they were considered grandfathered clients and they were under a no worse off policy. So nothing really changed for them. They didn't have to make any personal contributions if they weren't already in the past. Anyone that came into the system after that date, we transitioned them automatically over to support at home. But it was quite a big transition because they went from having these package funds where they could build unspent funds and save up for products to suddenly moving across to a quarterly budget and not building up thousands and thousands of dollars of unspent funds. So now, and I don't know if there's anyone in the room or people that have known people, they'd have a home care package level 4 and they might have $15,000 in unspent funds. They got to keep that as a grandfathered client, but moving forward, we're no longer able to build up huge amounts of funds like that. So at the end of the quarter, any unspent funds that you have, we're only allowed to roll over 10% or $1,000, whichever is greater. So we're no longer saving up for products or extra services or for a rainy day. When you roll over onto a support at home program, so if there's anyone in the room that's waiting for a support at home package, they might be on some CHIS funding now and they're waiting for an assessment, you may get that approval and it may come through as a minimum service offering. So what that actually means is they'll only give us 60% of that budget for the first quarter. So we need to figure out what are the most important services, because once we go into our support at home, we're going to have to stop our CHISP. So what is the most important services while we're only using a minimum service offering for the first 3 months? That's one way. In the past, they used to just give you a lower level package. So if you're waiting for a 4, they might have given you a 2 until the rest of the funding came through. At the moment, we're seeing probably 80% of packages that are coming through for support at home are on a minimum service offering, which means they're only getting 60% of their funds for the first 3 months. So it can make it quite challenging. But what's really exciting about that is we no longer have to use those quarterly funds to save up for equipment or home modifications, because there is now another scheme which is called the AGECare scheme. So it covers all of your home modifications and your assisted technology, whether that be a 4-wheel walker, whether it's an over-the-toilet chair, shower chairs, even down to your grab rails, your ramps at your front door, at your back door, to make sure you're safe to get in and out of your home. This is a different bucket of funding. And quite often when you're assessed, you'll also be assessed for this funding at the same time as you're assessed for your services. So super important to let them know if you are struggling to get in and out of your back door, you need a grab rail, because this will not be coming out of your standard quarterly budget. It will need to come out of an assisted technology and home modification budget. So always explain exactly what you're struggling with at home, or if you've thought about that chair that you think you need, but you haven't quite got round to looking for one, or you can't quite afford one, really important that you talk to them about it when you have your assessment. ATHM funding ranges anywhere from $500 on a low, $2,000 on a medium, and then up to $15,000 for a high. 5 minutes for me. Okay. The other changes that we've seen under the Support at Home program is the restorative care pathway. Formerly, this was a separate program that you couldn't get once you were on a home care package. So the restorative care program provides you up to 12 weeks of intensive goal-directed support, which obviously has a lot of allied health, nursing. It's to help you restore to your original function. So if you were someone that was quite happily ticking along and then you've had a bit of a health crisis or a fall, this is a 12-week intensive program to restore you to where you currently were before that health crisis. Before, you weren't allowed to get this if you were already on a home care package. Now, this can happen anywhere throughout your support at home journey, which is really exciting because it actually means we can do more intense services over a 12-week period, and then you just go back onto your normal support at home package. End of life pathway. This is the final months of your life. This is for people who are usually in their last 12 to 13 weeks, and it's $25,000 towards your palliative services. So it's now offering people the option to be able to pass away at home with their loved ones and how they choose. Again, it doesn't clog up the hospital beds, but it also gives you choice around what those final days, weeks look like. Super important. It's terrible. It is a once in a lifetime opportunity. You won't get this until you're in your last 12 weeks, because once we've gone through that 12 or 13 weeks and you live to 16 or 20 weeks, that funding reverts back to a package. So it needs to be, you'll need to have a doctor. There's quite a bit of a process through it, but it is incredible, and it's a really good idea to plan for the future and what that actually looks like. Now, case management, how are we paid as providers? Everyone wants to know how that's working. Traditionally in the past, we were paid anywhere up to 30 to 35% of your package funds. That is no longer the case. So aged care providers get 10% of your quarterly budget, and it's a pooled 10%. Now, we don't automatically get to keep that 10%. We have to carry out case management services, and then we have to bill against that time. So every time we call you or things like that, we actually have to record it. So it's making aged care providers more accountable for managing your services. So in summary, the pathway through the system is, first of all, contact My Aged Care. If you're already in the system and you're noticing that things are getting a little bit more difficult, request another assessment. Really important. I prefer that assessments are done face-to-face because you get a better indication of what people are actually struggling with than over the phone. After that, you get to choose a provider. With CHIS, you can choose several different providers because each of your codes are individual. With support at home, it is a single provider model. So it's really important to choose the right provider. And I think Darren was going to talk about some questions that you should be asking each of your providers. And then, of course, once you're engaged in the system, we will build a care plan. And we start with the services that keep you safe and independent in your own home. We build a care plan which outlines exactly what you want when people come into that home so that you don't have to tell the person where the vacuum is every single time they come in for a clean. We work with services that are aimed for you to achieve your goals, whether it's to stay strong and stable in your own home or whether it is just to have a really nice healthy meal cooked because you're on your own now. And no one's cooking a roast on a Sunday night when they used to feed 5 people and they're only feeding 1. So I hope some of this was actually valuable information.
So everybody, Darren Young is from the Council on the Ageing, the CEO, and the Council on the Ageing we know as COTA. And Lucy mentioned that as well in her talk. So COTA is a charity that's dedicated to advancing the rights and interests of older people. Some of you may be members of COTA already. As the Chief Executive Officer or the CEO, Darren Young brings over 30 years' experience as a not-for-profit professional. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Just reflecting, we're talking about the reforms. I first started running aged care services in the 90s and saw some of the first accreditation come into our aged care facilities. And I think we've gone on such a terrific journey to try to get a better system. And as Lucy was saying, this is the most significant reforms that we've had for quite a while. And one of the key messages I want to say to you is, and you'll hear a lot of negative stuff in the media, and you'll even hear a bit of negative stuff from me, but keep the big picture because these reforms are actually very good reforms. They are fundamentally changing putting consumer into the centre of things, putting you in charge of things, really preserving your rights as an older person more than any other time in the last 30 years that I've seen. So the changes are good. There's some teething issues along the way. And those teething issues aren't always good. And I can certainly, as I talk, I can certainly say that my mother is a recipient of aged care services and she's always my touch base. If I'm hearing things in the community, I'm talking to older people, I'll ask Mum, I'll say, Mum, what's happening here? And she'll always give me tell me what's actually going on the ground from her perspective too. So today, I want to talk about costs. Lucy's covered a bit about costs, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and that might give me also a little bit more time to tell you what people are actually experiencing, because I want you to have a good understanding of some of the shortcomings. There's a lot of information out there that does say how fantastic the system is, and we agree with that, but it doesn't work on the ground. So I want you just to be aware of some of those issues. So that'll give me a little bit more time to talk to that towards the end. I'll just put this up on the screen. If you this part of the conversation is about supported home. One of the most common things that I have when people have had some interaction with a provider, they're trying to get services, costs always seems to come up in conversation. I guess the one key thing here I want to say about costs, and I'm going to skip over a number of slides, is that don't start with thinking about costs. Yes, I can. I'll try to. I can even grab a mic actually. Well, can I grab a mic? I'm challenging it. Thank you.
That do give some feedback.
Does that work any better? Is that better? I do have the need to sing when I have this here. That's not going to be good for the audience. So one of the key things that we've learned from talking to people is, and we've seen this firsthand, is when there's been early conversations about costs in getting the services that Lucy talked about, people have been declining those services because they're worried about, a lot of us are on fixed incomes. They're worried about the impact of having to make a co-contribution, and they're refusing those services early. And so I think if you're in that situation, the starting point is more, what are my needs? How do I want to live my life? And, how do I stay safe? How do I stay well? How do I stay independent and connected into my community? Have that conversation first and let the cost conversation come second. Because what could happen in that cost conversation is you might find you don't have to pay as much as you think. You might find that there are what's called hardship provisions that you might be able to apply. It means you need to pay less as well. Or you might find that through a mix or a change of those services, you can still get a very good outcome and still be able to afford it. So my greatest fear is when I'm talking to people is they've already walked away from getting support because they're worried about that co-contribution too early. So that's the one thing that I want to say about costs. Let me move forward. Lucy's covered funding levels. You might go, gosh, there's so many levels there. There used to be 4, and you go, why have 8? 8 is good. 8 is good because with 8, there's a more nuance. You can better get your needs met. So 8 for us is a good move forward. That was a good change. And in terms of the budget, and I don't know about any of you, a lot of people get a bit uncomfortable about talking about budget and dollars, but I encourage you to be really across it and ask those questions of your provider. Ask what have I been classified for under those eight categories? What are those approved services that I can purchase through that, and get an understanding what that looks like over a quarter period. I think that's really needed. Now I'm going to jump forward a bit because Lucy's covered this, and this. I'm going to go to here. So one of the things that, one of the changes going forward is going to be the pricing of services. Now, at the moment, providers are charging their own prices for services, and that can be just like anywhere else. And when you're looking at getting a provider, you'll be looking at their prices. Prices are published, they're made available. What's going to happen from 1st of July is those prices there's going to be, the Commonwealth Department has put a cap on those. That doesn't mean that that's what providers will charge. It means they can't charge any more than that. So you can imagine what's going to happen over time is that price will be a less of an issue for people. So there still might be some providers that may try to offer a little bit lower price, but overall you'll see a shift. And price won't be the key determinant. So in terms of other things that we tend to buy, if you go out, I'm going to buy a barbecue on the weekend, yeah, I'll look at quality and all that, but I'll also be looking at price. Price is going to become a little bit less important. The things that you should be looking for when you're going to a provider is reputation. That's why it's good to know other people and talk to people, because that's your best guide. If you've got someone at your bridge club, any bridge players here? Always good social connections. Not that you can talk while you're playing bridge, of course, which I found out. When you talk to others, find out who they're using and how satisfied they are with the services. That is your best guide initially. Reputation really, really matters. That's number one. Number two, availability of services. And you'll find differences between providers, that some will have services available, some won't, some have to have a long waiting time. I was speaking to a woman a couple of weeks ago who got an agreement for services. Now she's probably now 6 weeks in waiting to receive services, still hasn't got any services. And, she was a bit disappointed with that because she got the sense when she was talking to the provider, it was all going to go fairly quickly. So availability of services, and when you're talking to a provider, when is this going to start? Is there any guarantees that this can start next week or next month or whatever is agreed? Get a good understanding of that. And then the last question to ask, particularly if you're talking to your friends, is reliability, making sure that people turn up when they should be turning up. Another common one that I've hear when I talk to people, particularly where they're getting the social support, if anybody's ever had the social support, and again, my mother's a classic example. She's got a woman that comes to visit her. They have great conversation. They probably eat too many donuts from my perspective, but they have great conversation. But every now and then they swap her out, and much to the frustration of the worker, also much to the frustration of my mum. And they don't actually ask my mum that. They don't ask her, are you okay to have someone else come along for a social visit? Mum's basically got a friendship with that worker, and they keep swapping her out for someone else. So reliability is a key thing too when you're getting services. You'll find that when you're talking to providers, they've got a fixed time frame. I've got multiple examples of where they're coming over the kitchen table. There's a short space of time, and people are feeling a little bit pressured to agree on things. One of the things you should be doing is, while you're getting clarity on these are the sort of services and supports that I need to live my life well, at the same time, try to get clarity around what does that mean in terms of the costs that are involved, the service price, your contribution, the co-contribution, what you should pay as well. I think too, you should be asking, how are the charges made? Some people charge by the hour, some people charge by the visit or item or another method. Ask those sort of questions. One of the best things you can do is ask someone, as you're talking to a provider, can you show me an invoice? Can you walk me through how you charge those services, and can I see it in an invoice? They should be able to have something with you that they can show you, so you can see how those charges work, and you can see what the overall cost is and the part that you pay. That's really important. One, you've got to be able to read it, and certainly we've seen examples of where invoices have been in, I'm sure ComLink would do this, size 8 font, that people would hardly read. You want to be able to read the invoice, but also you want to be able to understand it. So do take the time to say, well, how do you invoice? Can you show me an example of that? I want to see it. So when I get my first invoice and I'm an informed consumer, I can go through that and see if that really does match the services that I've received. You hear about care management. Lucy talked a bit about care management. The key thing here is just to note that it is 10%. There's no negotiation on that percentage. That's what it is. It's fixed, and it's fixed to give consumers reliability in what they will pay for care management. The key things to ask about care management is really, who is your main contact, and how will they contact you? Under what method will they give you a call? Will they send you an email? Will they send you a text? How will they contact you? Again, my mother, another great example of this, they will only ring her landline. Now, my mother's a gardener, so she'll hear the phone ring. She'll walk up, come inside, take her gloves off, get to the phone stops. What happens then? What would you do? Oh, maybe that's my provider. I'll give them a call. What happens? She picks up the phone, she rings, gets a call centre, can't reach the person, and she gets a bit frustrated. So I've been talking to Mum about maybe there's another way that there could be some communication there, because you're never getting hold of your provider. So, care management really fixed, but I think it's worth knowing who do you contact, particularly if things aren't working as well. And inevitably, there'll be times when the services are not meeting your expectations, or it's not quite what you thought. You want to be able to have a conversation with that person and fix it very quickly. Again, if charges are unclear, certainly pause. There'll be review opportunities. That's the time to sit down and chat, particularly about where a service did not happen, where a charge is unclear or different than expected. or the cost wasn't really sufficiently explained before you agreed to it, or being charged something you think is maybe outside. And there is examples of that when I go around Queensland talking to people where they've been really confused about what they had as an initial conversation with the provider, which is what ended up on their invoice. So always take the time when you've got that, have a look at it, doesn't match your expectations, and then set that time to kind of review it with the person that's working with you from your provider to make sure that you're comfortable and you're clear. Again, if cost is a barrier, financial hardship assistance certainly can assist. So don't decline support before asking for some assistance. I think one of the challenges of this has been in practice, and we've been a big advocate of wanting to make sure there are hardship provisions for people. It can be a little bit cumbersome. I think there is a sort of fairly lengthy form to fill in, and it can take a while to resolve. In fact, I think one of the ones we've seen was as long as eight weeks, I think it was. So just know there's a bit of a process behind this, but there should be no shame, no embarrassment about applying for hardship if your financial circumstances do not take into account sufficient ability to pay for these services. Certainly apply and see if that can be changed. So really one of my key messages is be an informed consumer and be an assertive consumer. I have lots of conversations with people, again, my mother's one of those, who feel very uncomfortable at questioning anything that the provider does, feels very uncomfortable about raising a problem. In fact, she will prefer my sister or I to be raising those problems. She's worried about that. But that is part of, and providers are very well versed in dealing with issues, and they are 99% of the time open to that sort of feedback. So if there are issues, do raise those with your providers. But a couple of tips: always ask for information in plain English. One of the last forums I was with up here on the Sunshine Coast, and I was talking to people in the break, is that they were just really flabbergasted, I can't think of a better word than flabbergasted, at the Commonwealth jargon. No offence to any Commonwealth representatives here in the audience, but the jargon that's used in the aged care space can be really difficult to understand. So do ask to explain it in plain English. And if English is not your first language, a lot of providers have information available in different languages that can be provided, and that can be really helpful to understand. I always recommend taking notes when you're meeting with providers and bringing someone with you. That's not always practical, but it is preferred. And I've certainly, again, another example, my sister was lined up for a meeting. We had it all lined up to meet with the provider. The provider changed times, and then suddenly they just met with my mother alone. And we weren't really happy with that as an outcome because Mum not that comfortable about speaking up. Make sure you never feel rushed in these. Slow everything down in those conversations. Leave making sure that you understand, and try to keep copies of everything, as I'm sure many of you do, so you can go back and refer. One of the great things of these recent reforms has been registered supporter, bringing in that concept of, this system is so complex. We do need others around us to support us. I just had a visit from Taiwanese health students come and visited us here in Queensland, and they're trying to understand the aged care system here in Queensland. And we talked about how we provide for Council of Aging Queensland, we offer some aged care navigation service. And they go, why do you need that? And so we said, let's give you a little glimpse of our system, shall we? And then we showed them, and they went, oh, it did seem complex to them. And so, yes, it is complex. And so having some level of navigation can be really important. But just a registered supporter is really a person that's can be a friend, it can be a family member, just helps you work through that decision-making process. They help you ask the right questions. They'll be listening differently in those conversations, and they pick up things that you don't. I always recommend that and having a registered supporter, and that can be done through My Aged Care. And just at the bottom point of the slide, they don't make decisions for you. Whilst they are formally registered in there, they are a support for you. I often get asked, what are the key things you should be asking a provider? We've talked about a couple of these things like availability. Do talk about the staff. What sort of staff will come and visit, male or female, or, is the person experienced? Are they brand new? Get an understanding of their workforce, get an understanding of how well they're trained. Of course, costs and understanding what you pay personally. The contact is important. Flexibility is really important too, because our lives will change as we go. We can book things in, but how easy is it us to change things as we go? And what happens if we do change things? Are we still charged for what we had booked earlier? Rates and concerns is really important, and almost all providers will be giving you that information right up front about how to make a complaint a concern. There are certainly ways to do that more formally, but it starts with your provider, and you should invest that time. And if there is something working, talk to them first before you go and escalate. There are organisations like OPAM that do advocacy, and there's formal complaints work processes in the Commonwealth, but keep it at your provider level, because 9 times out of 10 you should be able to work out a good solution with them. Now we talk, again, this is a language thing. At the end of the day, when you're engaging with support at home and you're trying to get services in there to live your life, it really should support your life. And so, as Lucy was saying, getting really clear about what your goals are. How do I want to live? What's most important things to me? What don't I want to lose as I'm losing capacity? That's really one of the challenges of ageing. We're losing capacity as we get older. What can be put into place to help me do that? And it may be something as simple as just keeping the house clean. It may be that my garden's my passion, but I need a little bit of help with the gardening. That's that starting point. But it can get a bit complicated in terms of understanding some of these terms. So when you get your assessment, as Lucy was talking about, that will give a support plan, and that will there'll be some high-level needs and goals there, and there'll be some recommended supports in there. But when you work with your provider, they will understand what you've been classified as under those 8 categories. They'll know what funding levels you've got. They'll know what services you're eligible for. Then you work out that plan with the provider. You sit around the table, you've got a budget, and you work out what's going to work best for me, and you can mix and match as best as possible. So you want it to work for you, and you may not get it working right, and you want to adjust that over time. That's really important. Now, a couple of other quick things. Just speak up early. As Lucy alluded to, there are some wait times in the system. My mother is one of those people as Lucy and I were talking about. I think she's almost up to month 7 waiting for a reassessment. She should have probably asked that for much earlier, because now I think she's starting to have some difficulties, and that's probably going to prompt a bit more of a crisis for her, which we don't really want. But also when workers don't turn up, when the charging's not right, things are changing, they're the times to really speak up and engage with your provider. And just a bit about complaints and advocacy. The Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission is probably worth knowing. If you can't resolve things with your provider, you can certainly go to OPAN as well. But if we've seen lots of complex problems and long-standing problems, that's when the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission can really support you to get resolution. Yes. So OPAN's older persons network, essentially, they're an organisation that are funded through the Commonwealth Government to specifically help advocacy in the aged care space. Now, in terms of Council on the Ageing, I'm looking at Colin to see how much time I've got. Colin, 2 minutes. What I want to say from what we've been in this space for a very long time, arguing for improvements in the aged care system. COTA have been around for a long time. COTA Queensland, that I'm CEO of, been around since the 50s. We're about to come up to our 70th birthday, by the way, which is really exciting. we think there's been some important progress through the reforms and the way the reforms has gone, but there were things that we weren't happy with. One of the most recent changes of the things that we weren't happy with, of course, is the inclusion of showering, dressing, and non-clinical continence support being recognised in that clinical care. And that's the one, as Lucy mentioned, where there is no contribution to. And we think that's a really good base to be working on. But that took a lot of advocacy nationally for us to argue the case. There's still lots of things to improve on. The wait times for me, given all the conversations I have across Queensland, is one of the most critical things, and that's for both getting assessments, reassessments, and services to start. And if you are living anywhere outside Southeast Queensland, the further you get out, the harder it's going to be to get some of those services in place, the longer the waiting times might be. So that's the thing that we're most worried about. We're worried about that there needs to be more assessors in the industry. We're certainly worried about, you would have seen the news about concerns about assessors leaving. We think that needs to be addressed because it really starts with that assessment, and it's not until you get that assessment until you can start to get some of your needs met. Other things, of course, we're hoping that there'll be clarity going forward in terms of the costings, and hopefully that becomes much more clearer after July. And then overall, we want to make sure that everyone can access those services no matter where you're living. And there's some particular groups that we're worried about in our community. If you're not digitally savvy, that can be a problem for you. And also, if your English is not your first language, we know that some people are really struggling in the space to understand the whole system and how it works. So there's a bit more work that's got to be done there to improve access. Lastly, just ending on this, be informed, be assertive, be supported. They're the key things from my perspective. If you're going into this for the first time, get the support that you need, have someone with you, and ask really good questions. Thank you.